This is Al and Mike from the YouTube channel 44 Teeth. I phoned them up and asked if they wanted to come and get stuck in the mud with me on the Trans-Euro Trail in the south of England, and they said yes. So I got a brand new Harley Davidson Pan America Special, the heavily updated KTM 1290 Super Adventure, and the ever-present BMW R1250 GS Rally. Welcome to our 1200cc Plus adventure bike review.
As if no one knew what I was going through.
The Harley Davidson Pan America finally arrived after a couple of years of hype, and KTM did that thing that KTM do where they released a new version of a bike without really telling anyone it was coming in the 1290 Super Adventure R. I think those two bikes are the most interesting new bikes in the big bike category for adventure bikes. And really, when it comes to testing those two bikes, the king is the 1250 GS. Like, it is the biggest selling one. Most people that ride them really like them. And so that is the benchmark that you're always going to compare these bikes against. And so those are the three bikes we've got for this test. This is Al and Mike doing the intro section to the video for their channel. I didn't record an intro because I forgot, but if you want to see their version and their hilarious intro, you can get the full link to the video in the description.
Yeah, we're going to go on an adventure and get Lel involved, because he obviously can actually ride a bike properly off-road. And
yeah, well, Mike does.
Yeah, he can drag us out the ditches.
Yeah, we've got the tow rope.
Yeah. Is that right, Lel? Yeah? Sweet.
Oh. Okay.
Let's adventure.
So, welcome to the end of my road, and the very beginning. I was a bit of a pansy then. For me, this Harley is a really interesting bike. I think as a first attempt, they've shown themselves to be a manufacturer who are a genuinely high-level motorcycle manufacturer. They deserve a lot of credit for this bike as their first attempt at doing something that's, well, despite what they'll say, really quite different to how they've produced their bikes traditionally. We are currently also trying to navigate and talk. The Harley has a lot of things going for it on the road that it deserves some good credit for. The first of those is I really like the engine. I think the engine is really well done. There's a couple of little traits that it's got that are not perfect, but as an overall motor, it ticks a lot of boxes. And the first of those is that it's smooth and it's really well fueled. I think it makes it really easy to ride, but in the same sentence, it's also really quick. So you've got this bike that's super smooth, pretty easy to ride, not kind of intimidating in how it delivers power, but if you rev it and you turn the throttle, it's really quick. If you change the mode from sport mode, which I'm currently in, to road mode, which I'm currently not in, you get a very different character from the bike. In road mode, it's much more laconic, much more like a touring-y sort of feel, a bit more like the GS's in road mode, smooth, not particularly excessively quick, not particularly sharp, easy to ride, but significantly less power than sport mode. However, when you go into sport mode and you rev it a little bit, it is plenty fast enough to scare the living bejesus out of you if you are so inclined. I believe this is our first off-road trail of the trip. It does sound the same. Are you in off-road mode? Well, this is pretty good for our first off-road trail. Single track, overgrown. I'm in off-road mode. I've taken my rubber foot pegs out. Well, we've done one trail, 7 miles. My heart rate's been at least 150. We've dragged 2 bikes up a hill. Pretty good start to the ride, I reckon. We learned some things about the Harley as well. First one is the traction control. Traction control is not your friend when it's technical. It is really strong at how it cuts in, really limits the power, which was maybe a good thing, but it didn't feel particularly confidence inspiring because it was hard to build any momentum. Otherwise, the engine on this, in technical stuff, felt really good. There's this strange thing going on with this Harley. It's really plush and soft, and the engine is smooth and docile, and the riding position's very comfortable, very upright, nice and relaxed, and I quite enjoy it. But there's also something in it being so soft and so comfy that it feels quite sucked to the ground, and that comes with some limitations.
It's very soft in the suspension setting in off-road mode, and it kind of just floats over everything. As a result, it has the same problem that it had on the road, is you don't have any feeling of the tyres, so you don't know what the grip level is, which is fine when the grip level is really high. If it's a hard packed dirt road, I think it would be fine. If it's a slippery, muddy situation of any description, you just don't know what it's doing. It starts to wash before you're realizing it.
It's just a bit odd to ride. Like, I don't have a very good reading on it, and I'm sure over time this gets better when you learn what it feels like. Those things in conjunction make me, even though it feels very capable, they make me feel a tiny bit nervous. Like, I'm not happy to just charge this section. I don't feel like I know where the grip of anything is. I feel like I've got to just amble through it, and that's fine. It's a characteristic a lot of adventure style bikes have, but it's something I think that potentially holds this back from, say, a GS or a KTM 1290, is that they're maybe a little bit more connected to the ground and a little bit less floaty and comfort biased.
Like I say, if you're adventure touring on it and you're doing nice big easy-ish gravel roads, it feels very comfortable. You can get the Harley to do some pretty difficult stuff. I was quite surprised. The balance of it is good. It's low to the ground, it's not unwieldy, but it just runs into that limit quite a lot, and it runs into ground clearance limits quite a lot in like British riding conditions.
The ground in here is like hard and slippery, like sheen on top. Rope swing. So for those who have ridden the Tet before, out of the people who might be watching this, I believe this is known as Hell Lane. Not really sure why, but do you get scared to take the piss out of him because he's your boss?
I think if anyone went through here on this bike, we would have got stuck.
I think he drew the short straw a little bit, didn't he?
What do you mean? I bet you now as well that you've stopped, the suspension's lowered as well. Because it's in like
It's in that,
automatic suspension mode.
Now, as much as I'd like to slag him off for being completely crap, I think on this occasion, he's picked the wrong bike for the job.
I think you might have just overstepped what Harley intended this for.
I reckon we have.
I reckon we go find some nicer lanes that don't.
Yeah, honestly, it surprised me. You've ridden it.
Yeah.
It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
No.
Glowing praise.
No.
I know what you mean though.
You know, at mixed place, I just didn't feel comfortable on it straight away.
No.
And I felt more comfortable on it after doing more miles here.
Yeah.
But as soon as you put a downhill into the equation, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
With no downhill with no grip.
Yeah. And then anything with where you need ride height and ground clearance, you're in trouble. So.
I was just going to lean it on that massive sump guard and coming out. It's got to be good for something, isn't it? Ready? Way!
When it comes to handling on the road, the Harley is interesting. It's not my favorite bike in the way it handles. I think it has this really vague characteristic to it that's a little bit part suspension, a little bit the chassis geometry, a little bit definite design decisions that Harley have made. But the end result of that is this kind of comfortable, functional, plush bike that has very little feedback of the ground and very little information about the tires. So you get this situation where as a touring adventure bike, sometimes it feels really good on dry, sweeping, fast roads. It feels really good when it comes to riding it on tighter, twistier or wet, slippery roads, which we have a ton of in the UK. It does not feel happy. It doesn't breed confidence in you, and you end up being quite tentative with it. I generally think of myself as like quite a confident adventure bike rider, but I don't feel confident on that bike. It doesn't bring out confidence in me. And the other two guys on the test, Al and Mike, are really good road riders. And for them, it was exactly the same. It never bred confidence. You never got on that bike and straight away understood what it was trying to do. And it took me until probably 10 minutes before we finished this test, bearing in mind I only rode that bike a few weeks ago in North Wales at the press intro, to start to feel comfortable with it and to understand what's going on.
We're going to time how long it takes you to figure out how to put this mirror on.
After hours of riding in the rain, we arrived at the perfectly named town of Beer. Seemed only rude to not stop for a bit, have a drink, before heading out again.
Currently, absolutely biblical. Went for a beer in Beer, but I regret it now. It is gross. Alright, we are on our way. The rain is truly biblical. We couldn't find anywhere to stay any closer than 40 minutes away. So we're going to just mash out the last 40 minutes on the road. And yeah, that's that really. Ooh.
On day 2 of our test. We're getting out a little bit early today because we've actually got quite a long way to make it back to do some more good riding. It looks like it might rain a little bit more this morning, which is woo, super excited for that. Makes filming bike tests really difficult when it rains in this country, which is irritating. when you do my job. But otherwise, it should be really good. Time to go and grab a coffee and go and do a little bit more riding. This morning, I am on a BMW. My first ride on this for this test. It feels very nice. My first off-road trail on the Beamer, and well, I don't understand this bike because it feels very good. Almost straight away it feels easy to be quite precise with, which is really impressive because it's only got a 19-inch front wheel. It shouldn't be any good in ruts, but it's pretty easy to ride. I don't really have to put much effort in to keep it tracking straight. It's a little bit sketchy in these slipperier ruts. Ooh, girl. Off-road is, I think, the one area that people always struggle to believe that a GS is good because it's a big bike with cylinders sticking out the side and it hasn't got front suspension essentially, it's got rear suspension on the front and a 19-inch front wheel. But there's something about the chassis on a GS that is unreasonably precise and nimble. When you make small adjustments and you try to change the line a little bit, the GS responds really well, and because of that, I think even in technical riding, it's easy to put the bike where you want and easy to deal with the limitations of the 19-inch front wheel. You're obviously going to run into those eventually if you ride in sand or whatever, but it's just better than it should be.
The thing with the BMW for me that makes it so easy, that kind of gives it a bit of a leg up when you ride off-road, is that I think it's so balanced and so predictable in how it responds to input, and so it strikes a really nice balance between being precise with its handling when you want it to change direction and not being so nimble that it doesn't work on the road. It strikes all of those balances so well that it makes it a really rounded package. Like, I've jumped on it this morning and I'm going to film right here. The thing that works so well with this BMW is it has an intangible ease to how it rides. It's smooth and really balanced, and because it's balanced and the way the weight distribution is and the riding position, it's all quite easy to be relatively precise, to learn to be relatively gentle with, and to keep your balance even in slow speed situations. The brakes are amazing, the suspension doesn't move that much because of the strange telelever design, and sometimes that has its faults, sometimes that gets you into trouble, but more often than it causes problems, it solves problems. That, like with traditional suspension designs or not quite as well put together, I feel like I can change line, I have a really good idea of what the tyres are doing, I can feel the grip really well, so when it isn't there I can deal with it. I'm able to put the bike very much where I want to, and that, in that regard, it's very similar to the KTM. I think the one little drawback, and the BMW works around this very well, but the smaller front wheel obviously has some disadvantages where the KTM then gains them. But all in, this GS is unreasonably good. You know, British trail riding is pretty difficult, and there's not much I don't feel like I can do on this. I feel the same about the KTM. They've improved it a lot. They've moved it towards this bike, and the Harley it isn't really designed for quite the same level of difficulty.
It's some kind of devotion that brings me down.
It's pointless.
Just let me and him design
Yeah,
them and
yeah.
it'll be fucking fun.
It'd be a sweet bike, wouldn't it? Imagine that.
Needs a cup holder as well.
And
Milato.
a hot dog holder.
Well, hot dog. Vegetarian hot dog.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Specific.
Schnitzel dog.
it's almost hard to wrap your head around how different the riding experience of this bike is. I think I've talked about it already, but I am a really big fan of it. I think it feels fantastic to ride. It has a lot of really good qualities. It's very connected to the ground, which again is like quite an intangible thing. I've just lost my phone off my quad lock here. And hey quad lock, if you're listening, there is a stark difference in how the KTM and the BMW work. Even though I think these two bikes are more comparable than say the Harley is to this bike feels a lot more alive. You have a lot more going on. It's a little bit busier, it vibrates a little bit more, you can feel the ground a little bit more again than you can on the GS. And I generally think that that is a pretty good thing. Also, one of the other massive differences, and I think it changes your riding experience quite a lot, is the sitting position and your standing position, and your relationship between all the controls on the KTM is much more dirt bike-like. The reach is really shallow, so the gap between my bum or my upper body and the handlebars is really shallow, so I have like a much more off-road feeling position with my hands and the handlebars when I'm sat down, which the other two totally don't. The Harley has an enormous reach, especially when you move the handlebars to a more off-road friendly position. And the BMW also has a pretty long reach. The seat is really far back compared to the handlebars. But it mostly seems like that's where they've placed the handlebars on the triple clamp rather than like where your butt is in relation to the foot pegs.
The older one, my memory of it at least, is the suspension was pretty limited. It was very soft, it felt very open, it bounced off a lot of things. That made it feel top heavy, it made it feel a bit unwieldy in the weight, and they had this like aggro engine in there as well, which was super fun and super exciting if you like that. But the two together made for a confused bike that had a lot of potential, but it wasn't quite there. And this version of it feels way more like that potential is being realized. I set the suspension settings to the factory sport setting, the more the more stiff version. And the result of that is that this bike, the current generation, is a lot more balanced. The fuel is obviously a little bit lower because they've maybe changed the shape of the tank a tiny bit. And the suspension is way more composed. And that improves its road performance and improves its off-road performance.
I feel like it's just a more refined bike than it was. They've gotten better, sorry, I just wiped my visor. They've gotten better and better at making it smoother and a little bit more compliant for the rider to use. It's a little bit less abrupt on the throttle. Even in the sport mode, it's a little bit less angry, but it still hasn't lost the excitement. It's just a bit better. And as an adventure bike, I think you always have this compromise that you're trying to reach in what the peak performance is versus how nice it is to live with this bike all the time. And if a bike's too aggro, it puts a lot of people off.
On the road, the suspension holds up in the stroke much better, and it still has that KTM off-roady characteristic where it's pretty nimble, it's pretty light, it's quite easy to turn in, and it feels very alive. There's a little bit more buzz about it, there's a little bit more nimbleness about it. But unlike the Harley, because of those characteristics, I feel like immediately you have really good connection with the tarmac. You know what it's doing. So even though the roads were absolutely drenched a lot of the time the last couple of days, I always felt really comfortable. I felt like I knew what the tyres were doing, even though it was slippery as, and that gave me a lot of confidence on that bike immediately. Like, I've only ridden a KTM 1290 twice ever, and immediately I know what that bike's doing. I feel like I have a really good connection with it, and I think that's something that most people are going to get from this bike. Even though it's tall and it's a big bike, it kind of gives you a bit of confidence in its handling characteristics. The engine on the road is also very KTM. It's an engine that's going to suit people that have a little bit of character in them that likes to be scared, if you want your bike to really let you know that you're alive, that is definitely the bike for you. And with how well it now handles on the road, even with the 21-inch front wheel, I think it's a bike you're really going to enjoy. What have you thought of the tech so far?
It's banging. I really like it.
Yeah?
I'd love to come here, like, take a whole week, or do it just on GoPro, maybe on a Tenere or a...
Yeah, something a bit lighter. A YZ125? P-dub.
No, not for you.
Off-road, the improvements that KTM I think have made is that they've made it easier to ride. It's a little bit easier, lower down in the revs, it's easier to find grip, which has been my complaint with those bikes in the past, is I don't think they've been that easy to find grip on. I think KTM's adventure bikes have suffered a little bit with that, but the 1290 feels like they've figured that out. The suspension feels way more planted, the 21-inch front wheel and the chassis and just the whole bike as a package works really well. And for all three of us in this test, it was pretty much always the best bike off-road. It should be, because it's intended to be the off-road version, but it was really rideable as well as being really fun. The only caveat to that is we didn't get to ride it in many particularly fast situations. Most of the riding we were doing was relatively slow because it was very wet, muddy, slippery, but it feels really, really good. Like, it is a lovely bike to ride, and KTM have just done a really good job. I think the Harley is a really good attempt, like a first attempt at an adventure bike. They've managed to do a huge amount of development in what is ultimately a very short space of time. KTM have been making some version of that adventure bike for 20 years, and BMW have been making some version of that adventure bike for more than 30. They've got a head start, and Harley have done a really good job of catching up, and I'm sure it's going to get better with time. It's not a bad bike by any stretch, it just has some limitations. And I think if you're going to buy it, you want to recognize what those are and apply them to the riding you're going to do, and that will determine whether it's a good bike for you or not. With the KTM, I think the same thing applies. The limitations of whether that is a great adventure bike for you depend on the riding you're doing, a little bit your skill level, and how comfortable you are with a taller bike. It is a little bit taller, but it's also very composed with that tallness, which I don't think the older one was. I think the older version was a little bit uncomposed. It was springy and bouncy, and it could get you into trouble, and the new one doesn't seem to do that. I never had any of those moments on it, which I was really grateful for, because it makes it feel smaller than it is. The other thing that's going to determine it is just whether you like to be scared or not. It's fast, and it's abrupt, and it's intense, and it reminds you that it's fast, whereas the GS lulls you into a false sense of security by not letting you feel like it's fast while it's going really fast. And that's going to be the key difference between those bikes if you're looking at buying them. There's lots of other factors when it comes to buying a bike, price and dealer cost and so on. I think those are very individual things as to whether they matter for you. I'm not going to tell you whether those are good, but this is the experience that we've had riding these bikes in the last couple of days. This hasn't been the perfect test. It's been a 300-mile jaunt in a very British situation of lots of mud and slippery roads, and I think if you live in a country where the rain isn't as much, you would probably have a little bit of a different experience, especially with the Harley. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's been fantastic to make. We've had a really good time riding trails we've ridden. A lot of them have been part of the TET route, the Trans-European Trail route for the west of England. And it's a fantastic route. It's a bit tricky in places, but I'm really enjoying it. I can't recommend doing it enough if you've got the time or the inclination to go and do that. If you have enjoyed this video, I would also ask that you go and check out the 44 Teeth channel as well. They do a huge amount of sports bike, street bike, general really good content. They're really good people, great riders, make great videos, is worth checking their channel out. And if you like Brake Magazine and you want to support this channel a little bit more, we have a bunch of ways that you can do that. We have a web shop where you can buy merchandise and you can buy some kit and products that we sell that are stuff we really believe in. We sell some stickers as well. And we also have a Patreon page where we make a lot of how-to videos and we release videos early. This video came out a month ago on Patreon, so that if you want to see this stuff a little bit earlier than the rest of the world, that's the place to go. If you're watching this in 2024, the month ago doesn't matter. I'm sorry. And yeah, thanks very much for watching. We'll be back with another one soon.